Hi, and welcome to a new episode of Digital Ragnarok. We're joined this morning by Shiv Malik, Head of Growth for Streamr, former investigative journalist for The Guardian, and recently returned from the European Data Summit on the vision for the EU data economy going forward from 2020. Shiv, coming from journalism and then going into something like Streamr, I'm sure you got this question asked quite a lot of times, so
Yeah.
answer it one more time, please.
Yeah. How did I manage that transition? So, if you'd asked me when I was like 15, like what would be your dream job? I would have probably have told you, almost certainly, in fact, like I want to be an investigative journalist for The Guardian. And I got there. I was on the desk as an investigative journalist for The Guardian. It was an amazing job. I did it for, I was at The Guardian for 5 years. I was an investigative journalist for about a decade. And the problem is that when I got there, really, and it's still the case now, the media is just falling apart because the business model doesn't work. And so, I was watching, my colleagues in the newsroom just leaving through voluntary redundancy, left, right, and center. And it was just a really sorry time. And the thing about investigative journalism, it requires a lot of money. It's the most expensive form of journalism. And the reason for that is because you're often asking questions to which you don't know the answer to yet, right? So most people are just reporters. They go out, something's already happened in the world. It's very obvious that it's happened. And then they just go, this is what's happened, right? And then it costs some money to get there, to talk to people, et cetera, et cetera. But that's basically it. You know what you're dealing with. When you're an investigative journalist, you spend half your time trying to figure out what questions you need to ask to get the answers. So you don't even know what the answers are, and you don't even know if you're going to get them. So it's a big, expensive exercise. So I was really disenchanted from that perspective. And I thought, what's going wrong here? And it was clear what was happening. The money was going, the advertising money. So newspapers have always been supported by a dual model. Subscriptions, right? People buying the newspaper. And then advertisers, right? Who advertise in the newspaper. And these things have to balance out, right? They're dual income streams, which are both necessary. You can't just really have one or the other. And all that advertising money was going to two places, Facebook and Google. That's basically what was happening. So, the digital economy was eating the traditional media. People know this. So, and it was clear from my perspective, having kind of written a book on intergenerational justice and therefore being interested in economics at the core of it all. This is an unfair model. So in 2012, I did this really weird thing. I was weird at the time. I deleted my Facebook account. And it was so strange that I got called onto the news. Like I did it in protest at Facebook's at that time IPO, and they hauled me in on the news channel. And they're like, what have you done? Who are you to delete your Facebook page? Why would you make such a radical step? And I said, look, I don't want to be an info slave anymore. That's the phrase I used at the time. And I said, it's really clear. And for me, this started with like Huffington Post, right? Huffington Post said, oh yeah, just write content in this new open, wonderful, like internet way. And it's going to be wonderful. And everyone's going to be like great. And we're all like, going to spread love. And then someone cashes out with 300 million. And you're like, wait, hang on, what? Like, so other people are providing free work for you now. And you, Ariana Huffington, and your group of investors get 300 million. Same thing was happening with Facebook. Clear that we're all providing content for this thing and someone is getting incredibly rich and it isn't the people doing the work. So that was my protest. And I wanted to come back to that when I left The Guardian then. And so Streamr, I got involved in some day trading in 2017 when it was all like wild and furious and that was nuts. Made a lot of money and then like lost half of it. So
it didn't lose at all. That's the problem.
Didn't lose it all. So yes, that was a win, I guess. I joined Gollum for a little bit, for 6 months as an advisor, and anyone who's sort of come from that time in crypto, has an affiliation with Gollum because they were kind of one of the first out of the door in the kind of Ethereum community to do an ICO and to get people involved in their vision. And then I saw what Henry was doing at Streamr, Henry Piccola, who's the co-founder and CEO. And I just thought, this is brilliant. This is exactly what we need in the world. Someone thinking about real-time data infrastructure, and hopefully also someone thinking about how individuals can own and control that information flow.
I was thinking, because you speak of, the flow of information, and, the moment, maybe, with films like, what was it called? The last one that came out,
Social dilemma.
The social dilemma, exactly. Um, I think people still don't understand that the centralized model of ownership when it comes to data, it's not really helping the community. It's just making a few people, as you said, making them a lot of money. Um, I've been told that you were part of this European Data Summit. What do you think the message is coming from Brussels? I mean, are we waking up to this? Are we starting to fight on even ground with the big giants? What's the latest?
Not quite yet. So a couple of things came out of this data summit. So it was organized by the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, which, if you're German and into politics or German politics, then is kind of placed really centrally within the kind of governing party at this point in time. And they called some really big key players ahead of the publication of what is now known as the Digital Governance Act, Data Governance Act. And then there's 3 other digital acts to come out actually on the 9th of December. So by the time this podcast goes out, they'll probably be out and published. And there was a consensus, and it was shocking to me just how fast things had changed, right? So just take one small step back. GDPR had been out, right, for 2 years. It's been out for 2 years now, like in act. And that's based around privacy and the rights of individuals from within a human rights framework, right? So you can also have privacy through like property law, right? It turns out, but i.e., this is my house, you can't come into it because I own it, right? It's where I live. You can't take my stuff, my papers, because I own those papers, not because I'm also, because you also argue it from the human rights perspective. So it's interesting to know that background, right? So those people, there was a consensus that that model had failed to do what they thought it would do, which is to create competition. That somehow people would have these fundamental human rights and that they'd exercise them through the market, and that would challenge Google and Facebook and Netflix and etc. and Amazon. And that just didn't happen. And people were like, yeah, duh. I guess it didn't happen because isn't that obvious? Why, like, we're talking about political economy here, and you're talking about fundamental human rights and privacy, which is actually just one small part of what's going on, right? And everyone was really just flipping mad. It was amazing watching these like very seasoned like political actors from the policy space, like lawyers, activists, like a whole bunch of people just like, why didn't this work? This is so annoying. We need to move on. We need to do something now because the problem is getting worse. And it is. That is certainly true. The diagnosis is right from everyone in that space. Like, and even Google and Facebook know it's true, that they're overly dominant. They have huge amounts of power. That the data brokering economy is going on in shadow, in secret, under the table. They're spying on people left, right, and center. These are people who are not household names that you won't know about until they're scandalized somehow. And that this is an entire mess. And that the second thing was, and Europe's losing all of this, right? And if you're a European and you're part of Brussels, like that's not something you can contemplate. And there's this third thing, which is there's this new space coming now, right? Which is who owns, really fundamental question, who owns the data from your washing machine? Who owns the data from your car, from your fridge, from your smart meter, right? Could go on all day, right, with that list, right? Who owns it? Because maybe you're just like, it's going to be like it is now. Like you're just a consumer who pays some money, you get some like meaningless silicon, right? Like on your smartwatch. And some metal, but all the useful stuff is owned by someone else, right? And controlled by someone else. And you're just like an idiot, basically, who paid some money. And, for the next 50 years, someone is going to make a fortune off the fact that you made this basically stupid mistake. So everyone in that room was agreed. This can't stand. It's got to change, and it's got to change now. And I was like shocked. Because things don't happen that fast normally, right? You're like, what the hell? Like, when did this happen? Like, did you all get together beforehand and agree this? And I think I think everyone else there was shocked as well at how fast the consensus had moved. It was amazing.
And what were the conclusions? I mean, I get the part that this has to change, but were there any actual steps taken, or?
Well, I mean, coming out of that, I mean, there was just one conference. I think it was a pretty influential conference, and it was meant to be that way. But people are like, you know what, we got to kick some ass. That was what felt like the consensus was, and we're going to do it in these very specific ways through these 3 sets of legislation, right? So what are politicians going to do? They introduce legislation, right? That's like their thing. That's their tool set, their go-to tool set. But we're going to do it. I'm going to do it quickly, and we're going to do it now, and it's happened. So, what are the things on the table? I most understand the Data Governance Act because that's already out, and that's the bit that I helped, and along with a few others, help mold and shape and influence in some way. But there's 2 other acts. So competition law, it's gonna get serious, right? We're like, okay, we're not gonna take this stuff anymore. We're gonna actually we realize you are oligopolies. The usual method to getting rid of that oligopoly is to say consumers are getting a bad deal. The problem is that all your services are free. So we can't make that argument anymore, right? Like if the service is already free, how are consumers getting a bad deal? We have to do this in a different way, right? So basically that's a short version of how they're going to deal with it from competition perspective. Then you have to talk about, well, maybe other businesses are not doing so well because of you. And so we're going to tackle you on that basis, right? Or innovation isn't doing so well. So we're going to generally, that's quite hard to measure. How do you do that? Like prices for consumers are really easy, right? This innovation is like less tangible and measurable in that sense. Like what do you know that you're not losing? Like, well, that's a bit of a weird question to ask, isn't it? Or hard one to answer. And then there's general governance stuff like for markets and how you can make markets more open. So I think that's the Digital Markets Act. There's a lot of acronyms going around. And then there's the Digital Governance Act, or the Data Governance Act, I should say, which is, and that's the bit that we've been working on, which is like, can we think of something new to do, right? So how do we fix what's already there in these 2 ways? And how do we do something new and create a different model? So that's what the DGA is, the Data Governance Act.
And the different model, would it be based a bit on data unions, or would that be part of the model? Because I know you guys at Streamr are quite fond of those.
We're very fond of them. In fact, in the preamble of one of the leaks, they use the term data unions, and in the published act now they use data cooperatives. So there's a bunch of words, right? Data you'll hear probably, and they all basically at this point mean the same thing. Data unions, data cooperatives, data intermediaries, data trusts, and I'm sure I could think of a few more. They all, at this point in time, people will desperately argue over like which one's right, which like all the different nuances, but they basically mean the same thing, which is there's a third party, there's going to be a body who has a legal duty, usually a fiduciary duty, right, to you. So like you go to your doctor, right? And imagine if your doctor didn't work for you, they work for the drug company, or you went to your accountant and they actually work for the government. That would be awkward. Or a lawyer and they worked for your opponent, right? So that would be a nuts world. That's kind of where we live with data at the moment, right?
It's a conflict of interest.
Exactly. So there's a legal duty. In law, these people have to act for you. They have to act in your interests. Otherwise, the whole thing would just be a mess, right? So that's what we mean by fiduciary duty. So we want these data bodies to have these legal duties to the people whose data they're supposed to be looking after. And that these bodies would then go around and broker that data on your behalf, right? That's basically it. So whether that means sharing it for altruistic purposes, let's say you've got health data and you want to share it because you think this might solve Alzheimer's, or it's like, yeah, it's my Netflix data and, I want to make some money off of it. Of course I do. Why wouldn't I? And you don't care too much about the privacy. You're like, sure, I don't care if my name isn't attached per se, then sure, people can know what I watch. I tell my friends or what I listen to on Spotify. That stuff is worth hundreds of millions of dollars, right? Netflix doesn't give it away. Spotify, they don't give it away at all, in fact. But, it's worth loads of money because people want to know, what do people watch? Like people in TV land, they're like, yeah, what do people watch? When did they stop watching that program? Like how many minutes in, right? Do they watch, which series do they watch after the one that they watched and what was the one before? All of that stuff is worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
It's basically like a consumer survey built in to the platform. I mean, they can.
Yeah. So we want that data we want people to have a right, first of all, to move that data, right? That's portability. It's the right of portability. We have a right now, which is basically written for the postal era. Like, you have to write in an email, and then they get 30 days. 30 days.
Yeah.
30 days. What are they doing in the 30 days, right? The actual human is answering this. Yeah. 30 days to answer, and then they can just like give it to you in the post if they really want to, but like commonly read formats, which means like a spreadsheet, or like it's like Word 95, document. It's like, that's rubbish. This is stupid. We need API access, and we need it now. That we might come. We don't know. In fact, it might come on the 9th of December. So we're recording on the 7th. So who knows? It's been kept in wraps. So we want that, and we want data unions to therefore manage all of this stuff, and that we have trust back into it. We don't want this to be a Wild West.
I've heard that Facebook actually threatened with pulling out of Europe. Would that be something that you think they would go through with, or is that just big words?
Yeah, it's big words. I mean, if they want to shoot themselves in the foot, then go ahead. And maybe people will miss Facebook. And they do provide value and a service for sure. But I think that's just, I think they were actually complaining about the tax stuff. That's what they were complaining about. But I mean, there's some refinements that need to go on with all of this stuff. They're all proposals at the moment, so it's not law. That these aren't actual acts in law yet. So it'll go to the parliament. All of this stuff will be kicked around. People will debate and argue about which things are best. But
speaking about all the governance and the fact that the EU is starting to wake up, how easy is it to enforce these new laws on something like Web3? Because to me, it feels like, the more I read into it, it feels like governments as an entity, they're not built for tackling this problem. And it feels like, okay, we build the economy, but it feels like governance is also being built into this new network. And my little dystopic thought is that we will leave this idea of a country and just become some sort of different clans, so to say, on a digital highway, something like that.
That's such a great question. So I went there and I talked about, okay, so if you get the idea of a data union, right? It's like this organization that collectively brokers your data on your behalf and gives you the rewards for it, right, back in return. Now imagine that being run by a DAO.
Exactly.
Are your listeners going to be familiar with DAOs, or shall I explain that?
Let's explain it.
Okay, so a DAO is a digital decentralized autonomous organization. So it's a way of kind of using smart contracting and some other kind of Ethereum tooling, if you want, to create these, like, there used to be kind of mythical organizations. Imagine if we could all just get together like on a platform, and everyone would like have the right like to vote, and it wouldn't be wonderful, and we could like distribute the money and the tasks out, and like, yay. So they exist, and they work. They're kind of rough around the edges. Now imagine a data union being run as a DAO. We're building one. It's happening. It's coming. It's
with Streamr.
Yeah. People, the DAO stack are like, this is such a hot idea right now. Why? Because at the moment, DAOs are basically, most DAOs are just basically like kind of investment vehicles, right? They're like, oh, we'll all agree to like pool our money together and then decide to stick it into these projects, and like then we'll all get the money out of it, right? Okay, fine. That's kind of interesting, but you're like, is it the best use? I don't know. So here's a revenue generating institution, right? A data union, right? It makes money. It's got like serious problems to think about, right? You've got to interact with lots of other people in the world, actual people, right? Data buyers, members, new members coming into the union. Like, could that be run as a DAO? We don't know, but we'd like to find out, because that would be cool, because then there's no one in control of your data. It's just all of us collectively. That's the whole purpose. But you need some professionals involved in that. This stuff isn't easy. Like creating good data analytics out of like raw data, it's not like, that needs to be managed. Like, you can't just have a smart contract just do that, like, or something, right? Or an algorithm. It needs to be a managed process. And data buyers who are going to spend 100 grand like at a time, they don't want to deal with some kind of just random website, right? They don't know, they're not going to send money to that. They exist very much in Web 2. They want to be handheld, so you need professionals. So could it be done? We don't know, but if it can be, that would be awesome. So that's a DAO. I went to Europe and I said, hey, this stuff is coming. Like, you want like these institutions to abide by laws, but what if there is no institution, right? What if it's just program code? And it's just like half the people in the room were like, kaboom, right? Like, what are you talking? No, like that's not a thing.
It's really hard.
Who are you? Get out of here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who invited you to this conference? Put that free lunch down and get out. So what the other half of the room were like, yeah, we get this. And it turns out the policymakers are like, we want this to happen. Like secretly on the side, they were like, yeah, that we know. And I was like, what, you know? I was like, do you? I was like, I don't even know. How do you know? And like, yeah, we know. We've been watching. And I'm like, oh, okay. I guess that's what you do. You were like, watch. She's like, yeah, we've been waiting for this. And I'm like, wow. And I mean that in all seriousness. Like, that's not just like a joke that I'm giving for the podcast. That's actually what they were saying. We want this to happen.
And this was at the Data Summit.
This is at the Data Summit. This is policymakers. These are people actually.
Wow.
They know what's going on, and they're like, look, we get it. Like, there's going to be tons of risks. We're really worried. We don't think this is going to happen anytime soon. But if it happens, go on. Sorry.
I mean the upside of it, though. I mean, if it does happen, and if you're really early on this.
Yeah. So, yeah, specifically in regards to like DAOs running these organizations, they were like, look, if it happens, great. We get all the risks, we get all that. We want the upsides because, yeah, why not live in that future? So they're open to it. And I'm like, well, fine, great. I guess it's on me and like the DAO community and the other data unions builders to like put our money where our mouth is and start.
Yeah, because it feels to me that, you know, we use data for advertising and research and so on. But my first thought was, wait a second, what if you use the data to better run a society? And then you have the Chinese experiment, which is very much controlled. But I think that any economy in Europe that would weaponize data in order to become more efficient with traffic, with resource management, with how they spend their money, you know, what they invest in, and so on, and having all this happen seamlessly without all the bureaucracy in between. I mean, you would literally, in 5 years, you'd be maybe 25 years ahead of everyone else. And it'd be like an exponential growth. So it feels like a new industrial revolution and something that you can't really ignore. And you have to put all your egos aside and just, you know, put your money on this, because I feel like that's what's happening with stuff like with what Facebook is doing. I mean, they're really going in that direction, and it's good.
They are. Yeah, you're right. They are. There is a new industrial revolution out there. You know, it's a funny property of data that there's basically zero marginal cost to reproducing it. It's not actually free to produce, right? It does cost money. It takes a lot of infrastructure, but there's zero marginal cost. If you want to just like copy and paste the data set, right, it's not a problem. So given that property, it's incredibly strange that it turns out that it's created, it's the backbone of the largest oligopolies in the world ever in human history, right? You're like, wait, well, what? Sorry. So here's this thing that anyone can replicate, and yet like 5-6 companies in the world have managed to silo it to themselves. That doesn't make any sense. Like, it makes sense with oil. You're like, okay, it's a physical thing. There's only so much of it, right? Why is that with data? And the answer is actually because they're using law, right? So they use the force of the state, the monopoly on violence that the state has to say, this is ours. You take it, we'll just drag you into court and put you in prison if you don't do what we say. So that's what they're doing. That's their game. And we haven't realized that we could play the same game. And that's what's nuts about it all, right? We're like, no, but this data gets created because we're the other side to that creation process. If you didn't have us, you wouldn't have anything, right? So all we have to do is sit there and record the same things that we're doing. We know what we're doing. You know what we're doing, but we also know what we do. We're just lazy or like technologically incapable, it seems, of being able to record the same things. Well, now, and that's totally understandable. Who would want to sit there writing every second of everything that they do on the internet down, like on a piece of paper? That would be nuts, right? So all you need is just like your own tool. And those tools are illegal or they can be cut off at will. And that's the bit that's the last bit that remains, right? The tools for you also doing the same thing as they do, collecting and recording what you do in your digital life. Those tools can be shut down at will, and they can be shut down at will because they use the monopoly on violence the state has to put you in prison if you don't stop. That's nuts. That's the bit that's like, oh, that's why you're an oligopoly, right? And that's why you need all of that money to like influence laws. So we're almost there where we've gone, that's crazy. No one wants this anymore. We're just going to change that law slightly so we can now have the freedom to do that too. And if it succeeds, then great. We're in that fourth industrial revolution. But like that small change will now, I think the Data Governance Act that's come out, if we can get portability, that's it. We've won. We're in the fourth industrial revolution for sure.
And how are we set up? I mean, as the EU, are we ready for this? I mean, I've recently tuned into your podcast or stream together with Ocean.
Yeah,
You're moderating that one. I was listening in.
that's fun.
Because there was a very interesting idea there, and it feeds back into this whole concept of building different modules in this new Web3 structure. And there was a question someone was asking that if there could be a merger between Ocean and Streamr. And I think it was Henry that gave this answer that we don't even need to merge. We can just build different modules that interact with one another. So literally a merger between different companies would just be two models that work in the same chain.
Yeah, exactly. So, so Ocean does basically data marketplaces really well. We do the pipelines, right? So to get stuff to a marketplace, you need like product delivery, right? If you want, and roads, right? That kind of thing, to use that crude metaphor. Well, we do that bit. So that merger, like I think what the question was asked, like, would you merge as companies, and buy each other out, kind of thing? You don't need that. That's crazy.
Yeah,
That's
it's
like
not relevant
technologically
anymore.
backwards. Yeah, right. You're like, well, we all both do open source stuff. Like people just plug and play like what they want. And that is the Web3 ethos, like writ into something useful. And that's the world that we're building. Are we ready for this? Like, I don't know. In that, like, it still requires humans to like write the code and like answer people's questions, and that requires scaling, and it's quite difficult. That comes with like practical difficulties, right? Like, oh look, have we revised the docs, the developer docs? Oh no, we haven't. Oh god, it's going to take like a week. So someone needs to do that, and it's happening. So this new data economy that actually now there seems to be some sort of consensus on from across the spectrum. So it's not just like a bunch of like crazy Web3 like developers, like 50 of them, let's say at most, sitting in a room or a bunch of like in Berlin, going, yeah, it should be like this, while like smoking pot, right? Like we're way beyond that now, and that's great, because you need to be way beyond that. Like people who write policy, people who are serious about industrial IoT, for example.
People in suits.
People in suits. As well, they're activists. People see this, they're like, yeah, it can be like this now, and it can be decentralized, it can be autonomous, it can be open source, it can be interoperable in many crazy ways. And we now recognize that moment where you're like, oh, the Web 2 thing, that's a bunch of dinosaurs. Like for the longest time, I think what's amazing, there's still companies obviously still in Web 1 phase, right? Where they're like, data, yeah, that's interesting, tell me more. So they're like, there's still like a good proportion of companies out there still in that phase. But the fourth industrial revolution, if you want to use that term,
It
or Web3,
feels for the
it's there.
first time since I was a kid that the internet is fun again. Like when I grew up was I don't know, around the dawn of the internet in the 90s, and everything was like the mere fact that you could transfer something at 2 megabytes a second over a network was like wow. And to see all that, it was so exciting, and LAN games and everything. But now when I look at Web3 and we have state and all the stuff that's happening with the blockchain, I was thinking to myself, I was like, finally, we're at a point where this is starting to look like something. And I'm wondering, with all this data that's being created, do we view data as a commodity or an asset? Because it feels like, and here maybe I'm going a bit into historical data. It feels I heard this argument being made that although we generate so much data, it would come a point or a scenario in which, let's say, some data that we collected today, 5 years from now, goes up in value through something that we're not aware of today. How do you manage that? I mean, would this bed a future where you could have, data managers that, take care of data as if it would be some sort of bonds or something like that? I don't know how to explain it.
Well, look, this is exactly what a data union is, right? In that respect, they're there to manage. Who wants to sit there as an individual and manage their own data? Like, I don't, right?
No.
And I'm like supposed to be some kind of like, expert of a kind. It's like that's literally the last thing I want to do with my life is sit there like with an interface going, yes, this LinkedIn stream is very interesting. I think I better tweak that and tweak this, and maybe this offer from this random data buyer like in the Philippines seems worthy of pursuing. And like I better get to like figuring out what the terms and conditions are. Like that's literally no one's going to do that ever, and that's certainly the last thing I ever want to do with my life. I want to just give it like I write books, right? I have an agent who sorts out all the other stuff that isn't writing the book. Great. I love that. I love the fact. And I'm like, yeah, sure, take 15%, like, because you're absolutely doing your bit to like make my value more valuable, right? The things that I do, my output, my creative output. Great. I love that. I want that. And that's why I was like, we need to make data unions. So like, that's what I want for my data, right? Is it worth as much as maybe writing a book? Probably, actually. I don't sell that many books. So, like if you were part of a Netflix data union, remember, not everyone has to be part of a data union for a data union to realize the value of, like, because you only need a sample size, right, of a population. You don't need all the people in one to know what's going on, right? Then yeah, sure, you could be making $100, $200 a year. That's not bad. That's just Netflix, right? And think of all the other things that you interact with all day long. So I want someone to think about these things professionally for me. And that means, yeah, what if it's worth in 5 years' time, there's this whole new field opening in whatever it might be, right? Sure, yeah, you've got the historical data there too. Do what you think is best and keep me informed. And then send me the check, please, right? Or the crypto through my account automatically because it's done through a smart contract. That's what I want. That's what I want. I mean, let me ask you, do you guys want that?
Yeah, I definitely want that. I was gonna ask you as
yeah. Good. That's nice. Consumer demand, clearly. Back to that kind of framing of GDPR and how we view the world. A lot of these, what I like sometimes meanly call them sort of privacy Puritans, and I was one of them at one point. I was in the Guardian at the time and sitting next to the very people who had broken the Snowden story, which was incredibly influential, obviously, on the Ethereum community and the developers there. But the view of the world often that they have is that we are atomized individuals who exist in a world where then it's us and then the state, and then also kind of these big conglomerates, and that's basically it. And that isn't the world. That's not the world that we live in, right? We know that. We literally open our eyes and look around us, and we know that's not true. The model is wrong. We actually live in a world where there's like tons of institutions around us. There's all sorts of communities, right? So that interact with us on all sorts of different levels, altruistically in some cases, others from a kind of basis, and in all sorts of ways. So they're the thing that actually make up life, right? We rarely have interactions directly with the government in some way, right? Actually, that doesn't make up the vast portion of our day at all. So great. When you refine that model, you realize that, right, you don't need to do this as like your solitary individual thing. You can do this through institutions, right? Great, brilliant. Like, doesn't that make life easier? Well, yeah, sure. You don't have to be alone.
Yeah.
But what I'm wondering is, I mean, they do realize there in Brussels that this whole idea is literally depriving them of a future job. Because I mean, the more we develop these elements, it feeds into what Audrey Tang is trying to do with Gov Zero. If you're familiar with,
Yeah, I know Audrey is an incredibly inspiring person. I mean, look, at the end of the day, everyone knows that everyone's job is potentially threatened in some way or another by the future of AI, right? We've been dreaming about this future, or been getting anxious about it for a long time. And it'll come, and I think it'll be slower than most people think, and then suddenly it'll like accelerate right towards the end. And there are lots of thinkers out there. Actually, the bookshelf behind me is full of those books. That's the bookshelf I keep for what's the future going to look like, and economics. And there are ways in which we're actually building the world that we want, right? Which is one where we can just do what Gordon has talked about, like doing art, doing some cooking, getting better at it, right? Those kinds of things, like those leisure activities. That's what life is for. We need be a bit more French about all of this. Like, we don't go to work to have our identity and to live our lives. We go to work so we can leave work and then live our lives and have our identity and, hang out with friends and family and paint and cook and eat food.
right. Since you're mentioning these books, do you have any book tips for us? Like, if someone wants to go further down the rabbit hole,
Yeah.
maybe your own books.
No, that would just be that would be wrong.
No.
Jaron Lanier, Who Owns the Future?
Right.
If you want like a nice seminal book, that would absolutely be a great one to start with. The annoying thing is now I want to turn around and look at my bookshelf. I would go for also Debt. Let me just get it down. Like, this is going to be slightly awkward for a second. So David Graeber just died recently. He was a American sociologist who worked in Britain. And this looks like it's a big book. It is a big book. It's actually an audiobook as well. It's really good to listen to as an audiobook. But if you want to understand, if you're into the kind of more monetary aspects of blockchain, then again, really seminal work. Like, it'll blow your mind to rethink money. It doesn't always give answers, but again, it's an anthropological study on what money actually is, or debt, if you want to put it that way, which is how he does. So those are two books.
Since we're in on this debt aspect and the cryptocurrencies, what's your I don't want to say predictions, but what do you make of this whole institutional buy-in into Bitcoin that is happening? Every day you hear like some new fund just buying 500 million worth of Bitcoin, another 400 million, and so on and so forth.
I mean, for me, Bitcoin's like a Trojan horse, right, into crypto. Maybe that metaphor is not quite right. It's like a gateway drug. That's it. That's the better one. Into crypto. Like, you suck on the Bitcoin and you're like, oh my God, wait, hang on. There's this whole other field of like psychological, like psychedelic, like drugs to take. And I'm an Ethereum through and through. So
Okay.
I hate like, Bitcoin started off, it's right there, it's in the white paper, as a way as a kind of monetary system for the world, right? Peer-to-peer transactions. And now it's like, digital gold. And it's like, what is this? This is nuts. Like, who are these people? And why do they think like a store of value on a blockchain is like the be end and end all of like life? It's like these people are boring to me. And I think there's also like a cultural thing going on. So I'm far more about Ethereum, which is building tools for human coordination. So the purpose isn't to just sit there getting rich off computer code, right? In a slightly novel way. That's what Bitcoin is. It's to actually create like those tools for human coordination. Like, how do we work better together using software? That's far more fascinating a problem to try and get yourself into. And if you can make some money out of it, which people have and people do, then great. That's excellent, because that's how it's supposed to work. It's not just supposed to be a one-way ticket to getting rich. That's just weird in my book, and actually very unproductive. And you can see that because there are thousands, tens of thousands of developers in Ethereum, hundreds of thousands, in fact, and there are very few in comparison with working on the Bitcoin stack. And they know that too. That's why they're kind of reduced to this one like pithy, digital gold statement, and that's all they have in their bag. And in fact, loads of Bitcoin is now moving onto the Ethereum stack, right, onto the Ethereum chains, a sort of wrapped BTC. So they can do all the funky things in Ethereum, like DeFi and the like, where they can't do that just on the Bitcoin main chain. So that's what I don't really care about institutions moving, except that, as I said, it's a gateway drug to something better, far more interesting.
I was thinking more in terms of, because we're talking about debt and the amount of debt that we have amassed, and all the money printing that's going on. And I was thinking more in terms of people are just like hedging their bets in a way with Bitcoin because you have a limited amount. And from what I gather, I don't think it was ever the idea for Bitcoin to grow into something, as I think it was designed as a 1.0 was the final product, while Ethereum keeps growing. And or am I being too far?
No, that's exactly right. I mean, well, it's hard to say. Knows Satoshi Nakamoto and what his intentions were. Was Bitcoin supposed to be developed into something better? I don't know, but it isn't, is the point, really. And Bitcoiners are now going to be like, you don't know anything about Bitcoin. Loads of things are happening. We're developing every day. And sure, okay, buddy. There's a weird cultural thing going on as well, which is, I think, the Bitcoiners are kind of Bitcoin maximalists. They are hyper libertarians. They always have been. And that very much fits in with a kind of Trumpist view of the world to a certain extent, right? And the Ethereum community are communitarians, right? They don't believe in hyper individualism and hyper libertarianism per se. That's not their main thing. They're like, no, human beings need to, should, and can, and want to work together. And therefore, we believe in these slightly different other ways of formulating values. And I think that's culturally what's going on between the two communities. So they started off in the same place. Everyone was originally just a Bitcoiner, right? Color coins, maybe, oh sure, whatever came before Bitcoin. But you know what I mean. And the Ethereum community was birthed from the Bitcoin community, obviously. But I think that's now separated out, right? You've got these it's like starting to mirror the divisions that are actually in the world currently, politically speaking, certainly in America.
Okay, I understand that. Well, I guess we can just wrap it up now. But before we do that, I was thinking maybe you could tell us a bit more. What are the plans for Streamr going into 2021 and having all this, new information from the EU? What do you guys have in the pipeline? Because I mean, we're all in the Swash Data Union. We're all there. So we're cheering on you guys. We just want to see what you guys are building.
So our job is to maintain the stack that Swash depends on, and also to ensure that there are more Swashes, if you want, out there in the world, coming at different angles and eating up the pie and growing the pie in all sorts of other ways. and the pie meaning the data brokering economy as it exists currently, right? Like whatever that's worth 100 billion, a trillion. It's all there for grabs. So that's actually my job as the head of growth for Streamr. It's literally on me of the sorts.
No pressure.
But the other thing that we're doing is part of that network is making sure that the peer to the way the data flows, it flows through our decentralized peer-to-peer network, right? And that's real-time data we're talking about. So we need to keep developing that network as part of that whole data unions framework stack. And so the next step is that making sure it really is truly decentralized. Anyone can come and run a node and stuff like that. So those are the two big developments of next year. We're going to make sure that we've got more data unions. There are more coming, and there's some really exciting ones around health. That actually I've got to fly because I've got to go to that meeting now. We've got to, so we've got loads of things happening on that front. More data unions coming, better network. That's what 21 looks like.
That sounds lovely. Well, we don't want to keep you from your flight. Probably very crowded at the airport.
Yeah. Yeah. my flight all the way to the next room so I can get myself some water and come back to this desk.
All right.
Thanks, guys. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for coming on. And just before we leave, just wanted to say it was a great honor to speak to you, and hopefully we'll catch up again sometime in the future. And I will be watching you on LinkedIn and wherever you pop up, and keep an eye on you, just like the guys at the what do you call it, the Data Summit.
Yeah, no. Well, look, thanks, and likewise, it's been a real pleasure getting to chat with you guys. So thanks a lot.